This is episode 166. Happy New Year! It is good to have you all here again in 2024. And because it is quite early in the year, it's 2nd of January, in this episode, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to share with you what are my plans for the podcast in 2024, as well as what changes are coming to the podcast in this year. So that's going to be the first part of this episode. And in the second part of this episode, I am going to look back at all the episodes published in 2023 and give you some of my comments from the perspective of time, what was the reception of those episodes and whether something came out of them or not. So if you're new here, that is a good opportunity to look at the most immediate back catalog from 2023 and maybe pick on the episodes that you didn't listen to and now you can. And those of you who are with me for a longer time, maybe you missed some of those episodes, or maybe that will encourage you to revisit one of the older episodes, okay? So, as YouTubers say, let's get into it. First change in this coming year, which is not really big change, but still it is like continuation of what I was doing to this point, is I will continue to put more focus on my newsletter and less focus on social media. So immediately, if you are not subscribed to my newsletter, then the link is in the description of the show, or you just go to newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com and subscribe to the newsletter. Or just like I said, the link is in the description of the show. Now, I am going to put more focus into that newsletter for a few reasons. First of all, maybe the main reason is that social media landscape is changing in a way that it requires to put more and more effort for less and less return. We saw in the last year like a proliferation of social media platforms. We have a new platform called Threads. We have a platform called Blue Sky. Twitter is kind of like a volatile, if you like, one way or another. The engagement rates drop down massively. It all just takes a lot of time. And, like those platforms are work the way they want you to be on them, right? It seldom works that you just fire content and forget. You need to be there. You need to do like engagement and so on and so forth. And just doing that on many platforms or even on one platform just takes a lot of time. And I think that my time is better spent researching content and producing podcast episodes and other content for you than being on these platforms and, quite frankly, spinning the wheels. Another aspect of social media platforms is something that I talked about many times before, is that it really would be so much easier for me to go one way and say like, well, I'm always pro hunting, I'm always pro this or against that or anti that and this. And that way you can get a lot of engagement and, probably way more traction than I am getting right now. Not that I'm complaining about the traction that I'm getting, but as you know what I do in this podcast, I am always striving to highlight different sides of the same story. I'm always trying to give you full picture, always trying to give you pros and cons and present any environmental issue from all sides. And that is probably not the greatest approach on social media platforms, not at all of them anyway. And I just basically want to say that I am still committed in 2024 in bringing you all sides of every story and presenting them in a balanced way. And I think that newsletter is just a better medium to do that. Ideally, in my ideal world, I would not use social media at all and only rely on the newsletter. Well, that's not going to happen. At least not in 2024, but definitely I will be shifting my focus. So once again, subscribe to the newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com or the link in the description of this show. And those of you who are already subscribed, there's like a kind of like a format agree that there's like a podcast episode and then feature article and maybe something else. And I'm going to be developing the content of that newsletter even further and more and putting more effort into it. So that is, well, maybe not big change to what's going to happen in 2024, but at least my commitment and where I am taking Tommy's Outdoors Conservation and Science podcast and the entire platform. Second change in 2024 is that I'm going to try to switch to weekly content. I will see how it goes. I will give it a good shot, maybe 3, maybe 6 months. And what you can expect is every second week, like to this point, I will be bringing you episodes where I talk with expert guests, scientists, conservationists, some environmental NGOs, or just people engaged in the outdoors and conservation, authors of the books, etc., etc. And in the, let's call them empty weeks, I am going to put solo episodes. So why solo episodes? Like I said previously, I'm getting a lot of feedback from you with regards like, what do you think about certain things? And it turns out that you're curious of my opinions on subjects like rewilding or reintroductions or hunting, etc., etc. And like, first of all, this is extremely nice thing to hear, and I'm truly flattered that you care about my views on various subjects. And last year, I tried making solo episode. It was called "Do You Believe in Climate Change?" And it was very well received. I even got the comments like, "Oh, this is like a best episode you made so far." So I'm not gonna lie, that was encouraging. And so in 2024, I'm going to push more of those solo episodes. And then, so the schedule will look like every second week, you will have typical Tommy's Outdoors Conservation and Science format with expert guests. And with every other week, you will hear from yours truly on selected subjects. Now, if you want to influence, and if you one of those people who care or are curious about what I think on different environmental and wildlife conservation, etc. matters, just give me, send me an email. And again, the best way to send me an email is subscribe to my newsletter. Just hit reply on that newsletter, and your email will get straight to my inbox. So just let me know, what are the subjects that you would like me to talk about, well, in solo episodes as well as in the regular format episodes with guests, interview, I guess you can call them. Although I don't like to call them interviews. It's more of like a chat. But then again, you can argue chat is a type of an interview. Anyway, so that is the second change. I don't know yet. I haven't decided whether that means that the newsletter will also be now a weekly newsletter. I don't particularly like to trash your inboxes with newsletter every week. So we'll see. Maybe I will keep the newsletter every 2 weeks. Maybe I will publish it together with every episode of the podcast, which then is going to be every week. That's also something that I'm curious of your feedback. What would you prefer? Definitely your feedback impacts to an extent what I do. So yeah, feel free to drop me a line and tell me how you would like this to go and what are the subjects you would like me to talk, either with my guests or in the solo episode. The third thing that is changing in 2024, and again, it's not even changing, it's just like more of the same and more focus of it, is that I am going to put more effort into written pieces, blogs and articles, as well as in public speaking. So speaking about articles, you know that on my website, tommysoutdoors.com, there's a blog section, and you can go there and read my blog posts that I'm putting for many years now. I am also on Medium. If Medium is your thing, just go to medium.com, Tommy's Outdoors, or just look up my name, Tommy Serafinsky. I'm putting content on Medium as well. It's largely kind of overlapped with what's on my website, but again, maybe you prefer Medium over my website. I also last year put an article on a platform called Scribehound, which is countryside writing platform. No. Something like Medium, only kind of like a profiled for countryside folk and pursuits and so on. So that was quite good experience, and that's what I'm thinking of, putting more effort into written pieces. And so again, the best way to get notified if there's like a new blog or new article is just through my newsletter. Again, some of those might be newsletter only, and they're not going to be published anywhere else. I already done that last year. I think it was like at least 2 articles that were only in a newsletter and can't be found anywhere else. So if you miss them, you miss them. Well, not really. You can go to my newsletter and you can subscribe and you can look up the archived issues of the newsletter, but you need to be subscribed. So that's one thing. And the second, in terms of public speaking, last year I've done 3 public speaking engagements. One was in France on International Journalist Symposium on Sustainable Use. Another one was in Phoenix. It was an event. I can't remember the name, like a wild something. Quite a good lineup of speakers, some high profile speakers on this event. So I was there, and obviously in Oxfordshire, I was on the panel on the environmental debate, live and unscripted, where I was talking about ethics of consuming meat. So I've done 3 of those public speaking engagements. Very good experience for me. I liked it. And so in the coming year, 2024, I am planning to do at least twice as many. And just by the way, if you're listening to it and you would like me to go and speak on your event, you're organizing an event or a panel discussion or whatever else, again, drop me a line. I would be very happy to do it. So yeah, that's basically for you folk out there who are listening to this and are thinking about organizing a conference or some other type of event. Yeah, give me a shout. I'll be happy to come up and speak on them. Right? So these are 3 main things that I am planning for 2024 for this podcast. So number 1, more focus on the newsletter, less focus on social media. Number 2, weekly schedule for episodes and more solo episodes. And then 3, more of a written opinion pieces as well as public speaking. So give me a shout if you want me to come up and speak on one of your events that you might be organizing. So that is the first part of this podcast done. And now let's look at the episodes that I published in 2023. And I'll give you some of my comments on them, how they were received, and so on. So the first episode I published in 2023 was number 140, Salmon, Aquaculture, and Coastal Communities with John Aitchison. It was published on the 11th of January. And like I said in all the materials for that episode, I knew that salmon aquaculture is bad, but I didn't realize how bad was it. And in that episode, we delve into all the, let's say, nastiness of the salmon aquaculture, impacts on the not only environment, but also on the coastal communities. And that episode was very well received. I had a lot of comments. It was shared many, many times. And by the way, this is the best thing you can do for the podcast, is to share the episodes. And interesting thing about this episode was that after publishing that episode, I got an email, and subsequently I went on a call with a gentleman who is, he is a representative. He represents the salmon farming industry, let's say, and he was very eager and keen to be on a podcast and kind of present his point of view that everything is, not as bad as it was presented in episode 140. I get on call with him because, I'm always curious about other side of the story, especially if it's side of a story that's not that well known. And I just decided there's no other side of a story. He's just a lobbyist for the industry. And yeah, I decided, I was thinking maybe to do debate. He was also quite happy to do the debate with another expert on the podcast. And this is also something that you folks told me many times that, maybe you can do the debate and whatever. Maybe I'm going to do that in 2024. But in this case, I didn't feel like I could get him on the podcast and keep questioning, or, it is just not what I do. I think that where I'm standing right now, the scientific evidence is overwhelmingly against salmon farming and salmon aquaculture. So at the end, I decided to not give him time. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a good decision. As always, you can let me know, what do you think about that? Next, 141, Atlantic bluefin tuna with William Roach. That was episode actually that I wanted to do for quite a while for a few reasons. Number one, it was about tagging programs. The theme is obviously bluefin tuna and tagging program of bluefin tuna, but we spent considerable time on this episode speaking about sharks and rays tagging program, which was in itself something I wanted to talk about on the podcast for a while. But also, William Roach works for IFI. I wanted to have people from IFI on the podcast again, probably since I started the podcast. And it happened already earlier. I don't remember now whether it was 21 or year 21 or 22. But last year, William Roach, again from IFI, we spoke about these programs. Oh, and one other thing is that along with that podcast episode, I also wrote a blog called The Demise and Recovery of Atlantic Bluefin Tuna. So again, this is one of those cases where if you subscribe to a newsletter, you will get the blog together with the episode. I published that blog later on my website and on Medium, but it was like a few months, maybe a few weeks later, considerable time later. So again, another benefit to be subscribed to my newsletter. Okay, the next one, 142, Treated Like Animals with Alex Simmons. That's a second time Alex Simmons appeared on the podcast. This time we talked about his book, Treated Like Animals. Wonderful book. Maybe wonderful is the wrong word here. It's very interesting. It's about improving lives of animals and, about animal welfare, if you like. And it has sections about, livestock animals and pets and laboratory animals and wild animals and, practices that are being, practiced, and whether, how they're stuck up in the current welfare standards. A very good book. I would recommend to get that book, Treated Like Animals. And listen to the episode of the podcast. Obviously, in the podcast, we didn't cover everything that's in the book, but I pick out a few interesting themes from the book, and we had a quite nice conversation with Alec about those. Like him or not, but Alec has a lot of these things well thought out, and it is always pleasure to hear him talk about them, even if you disagree. I think it's always very good for you to hear someone who you disagree with, but who has good arguments that forces you to think about your own arguments and maybe adjust or change even. So that was episode 142. And then on the 15th of February, another book review, 143, Emergent with Miriam Kate MacDonald. That episode, I feel like it didn't get enough attention. And the book is about connection of farming practices and conservation and how they can work together, and how conservation and even more rewilding can support farming, and farming can support rewilding and conservation, And obviously there are a certain portion of you who said never, rewilding is fundamentally against farming. I say to that. I don't think this is true. And yeah, I would encourage you to listen to that episode, 143, Emergent, and, get the book. Get the book, Emergent, by Miriam Kate MacDonald. A reminder that on my website, there's a section called books, and you can go in there and you can buy every book that I reviewed on the podcast or wrote a blog review. And when you buy the book using links on that page, I will get a small commission from every book. So that's a support for the podcast as well. Now, we are into March 2023. And in March, 1st of March, I published episode 144, How to Cut All Chemical Nitrogen on a Farm, with James Foley, our great friend from the podcast. James Foley is a listener of the podcast from very early days, and it was great to be on his farm. I was invited to his farm, and James walked me through his farm, and he showed me how he uses multi-species swards for grazing, and he doesn't have any nitrogen inputs on his farm. So then we sat down and we talked about his farming practices, how he does it, what was his road to get there. I think it's a very timely episode because, there's a mounting pressure on farmers to cut on the nitrogen and so on. So I'm sure we can learn a lot from this episode. And that episode had a lot of downloads, a lot of people tune in to listen to it. I always like talking with farmers who work the land and who have very high level of environmental awareness, if you like. Next one, 145, The Future of Hunting with Richard Prideaux. Some of you might know Richard from his podcast / website / YouTube called Modern Outdoor Survival. He's a survival instructor, and he's man who wears many hats. And we sat down and talked about the future of hunting. That's not the only episode about the future of hunting, and not the only episode about hunting in last year, but that was the first on the 15th of March. And Richard shared with us his views and his opinions, and that was particularly interested from the perspective that he, on one hand, he has a one hand in the countryside, hunting, farming side of things, let's say that way, and on the other hand, he is very much in the outdoors industry, hiking and mountaineering and all these sort of things, which are usually considered like non-consumptive type of outdoor recreation. And that was something that really was repeated a few times over last year, that really there's no such thing as non-consumptive outdoor recreation. And that was the first one, but the angle was specifically the future of hunting, how hunting will look like in the years to come, if it will look at all, because a lot of people are really concerned, or maybe not concerned, they're happy that hunting might be not around for too long. Okay, the next one, 146, multi-generational outdoors teaching with Emmanuel Rose, another book review with Emmanuel. Emmanuel is very experienced outdoorsman. He's fly fishing and hunting. In the US, it's North American episode, and we talked about his books that he wrote for his grandchildren, really. He just felt like his grandchildren don't have enough opportunity to be in the outdoors and, express their love of nature. And so he wrote the book for them. And it turns out that the book is very popular. And so that's what we talked about in this episode. Then 147, one of the highlight episodes of the year, Woodcock Research and Hunting with James O'Neill. James, again, is a long-standing friend of the podcast and listener. And, his nickname, Mr. Woodcock. He is doing a pretty advanced, PhD level research on woodcock and woodcock distribution. And his research is supported by NRRGC. And that's what we talked about. And I asked him a lot of questions about woodcock, like, for example, can you tell which woodcock is migrant and which one is local, etc., etc. A lot of downloads on this episode. Definitely one of the highlight episodes of the past year. 147 woodcock research and hunting with James O'Neill. Now, 148, end of April, environmental dialogue with Rob York. Well, Rob York requires no introductions, and Rob is reluctant to do the episode online, to do the interview online. I tried to get him on the podcast, for, again, a few years, but that wasn't an opportunity. I met him in Paris and on this journalism symposium that I talked about earlier, and on the last day, we sat down in the hotel lobby and we had a discussion about, environmental dialogue and how to instigate, let's say, dialogue between different parties who are interested in the environment and are there, unfortunately, there are bashing heads quite often and arguing instead of working together. So how to make them work together, how to speak to them. Very, very interesting episode, and Rob is quite a character. You know him from his YouTube videos and Twitter videos and Instagram. He has a quite strong presence on social media, so it was real pleasure, one, to meet him there and spend really 3 or 4 days together, hanging out and talking, and then to record that episode. So make sure you don't miss that one. And next one, we are in May. 10th of May, 149, changes to deer hunting and firearm licensing in Ireland with Liam Nolan. Liam Nolan is very well known in hunting circles in Ireland. He's a man behind the HCAP program or examination, and he is one man who keeps his hand on the pulse of all things deer hunting in Ireland. And in 2023, and I expect in 2024, a lot of things are going to change. We have changes coming into hunting season. We have changes coming into deer management practices in Ireland, as well as firearms licensing review, which obviously, everybody always is very anxious about because those changes are going only one direction. It's just tightening the screw for whatever reason. Even though Ireland has the most stringent and restrictive firearm regulation in probably entire Europe. But still, it was a review and something might come out of that. That might not be all bad, but we just need to know about it. And that's what we talked about with Liam. Now, since we published this episode, quite a few things changed already. So expect that in this year, 2024, I will probably do the follow-up. I don't know whether the follow-up will be with Liam, or maybe it's going to be a solo episode like I told you. But definitely watch this space if you're interested in changes for deer hunters in Ireland. Okay. Then episode 150, Predator Control with Barry McMahon. That was the most popular episode in 2023. The most downloads, the most feedback, the most interest, a lot of new listeners, subscribers, followers, you name them, after Predator Control episode. This is very important thing, and I'm going to keep talking about it. I wrote an article about Predator Control, the one to Scribe Hound that I mentioned earlier on top of the show. It's basically nobody says that Predator Control is the be-all and all of conservation of certain species, of especially certain species of waders or ground nesting birds, but it is very much required, urgently required, and there's like a very good, solid scientific evidence behind that. Barry is a professor at UCD, and so that episode is strictly scientific, and it just bothers me that a lot of conservationists, and they just like closing one eye and they're just like, oh, I just want to shoot all those poor animals. Well, not really. I think that predator control is very uncomfortable subject, and it has really bad PR, and I think this is because it was not communicated correctly. What are we doing and why are we doing this? So that was one attempt in 150, and clearly it is required to talk about those things. And I will be talking about predator control this year, 2024, again, for sure, because I think it is very important and required for better understanding of wildlife conservation. Then episode 151, Irish Sturgeon with Declan Quigley. I gotta admit, that episode about Irish Sturgeon, it's a funny story. One of the old listeners of the podcast, Johnny, shout outs, you know who you are, was asking me to do that episode. And I thought like, well, it's a good idea to do the episode about Irish Sturgeon. But man, to identify a person who could speak about Irish Sturgeon was next to impossible. It took me a long time, and thanks for attendance in various conferences, I was able to identify, a person who knows the guy, and finally I got connected with Declan Quigley. Again, that was episode where I traveled and I met Declan in his home. We sat down at his kitchen table and we talked about Irish sturgeon. And that was the funny thing, was that once we published that episode, probably, I don't know, maybe week later, there was big sturgeon caught in one of the Irish rivers. It turns out that it was like just basically pet fish released, but it was like a very funny coincidence that after publishing this episode, that thing happened. Very well received again. A lot of listeners from Ireland interested in sturgeon and story of that fish and how we lost them really effectively. Then 21st of June, 152, from anti-hunter to advocate with Philippe Jäger. Philippe is a hunting journalist who I met in France, in Paris, and he in his youth was declared anti-hunter. He hate hunting, he hate hunters. So that was very interesting transformation from that place where he is now a hunting journalist. He traveled the world making hunting reportage for various magazines and papers, and he works for Leica, I think. So again, we kind of delve into the aspects of communication about hunting, what hunting is, how to speak about hunting, what is the future of hunting, and, is it possible to turn anti-hunter into hunting advocate? Next one, 153, do you believe in climate change? I spoke about this on the top of the show. This was this first solo episode where I talked about, well, really that episode was my answer to a lot of messages and emails and newsletters that I received claiming that climate change is not real and, some crazy stuff on some occasions. And I thought that, well, I basically, didn't want to respond to all those people separately. And I thought that I can use that platform. I can use my podcast as a platform. I can respond to them all wholesale. And at the same time, give it a shot on those solo episodes, my first solo episodes in years and years and years. And like I said, on top of the show, it was very well received. And this year, 2024, I will try to do more solo episodes. So watch this space. Next one, 154, Hunting Europe, the Present and Future with David Scallon. David was a guest on our podcast before, and actually he appeared his second time that year. So it's 3 times in general, but this episode was specifically about how hunting in Europe looks like, this whole situation. What is there? Oh, by the way, in case you don't know, David Scallon is Secretary General of FAITH, which is European organization for hunters, but not on the individual level. It's for political aspect of hunting, and they're working. They have their headquarters in Brussels, and they're working with other state hunting organizations and kind of advocating and lobbying for hunting that way. So we talk about things like public perception of hunting and the acceptance of hunting and how this is changing and how hunting organizations are changing finally to kind of reflect the current situation and current perception of hunting. Definitely episode to listen to, even if you're not a hunter, but are interested in wildlife conservation, because like it or not, there are many very, very successful hunter-led conservation programs. And we talked about those as well. Then 2nd of August, 155, six-gill sharks and flapper skates with Patrick Collins. Patrick was our guest before. I think the program was called Sea Monitor, when we talked about skates, which is his main area of research. But Patrick was also on the boat with our friend Luke Ashton, who is like a master skipper, who is, well, maybe not specializing, but he's the only one who does it in Ireland, going after six-gill sharks. And Patrick was with him doing a little bit of the research about six-gill sharks. So again, long story short, I met Patrick on one of the conferences, and we said like, hey, why don't we sit down and talk about six-gill sharks? So we talked about that, but also we talked about the latest discoveries and latest research with relation to flapper skate, which is main research area for Patrick. And yeah, you should listen to that one if you're an angler targeting skates. Yeah, go and listen to it. You'll learn a lot. Then the next one, 156, Save Blacksworth Road Wood with Phil Sturgeon. Kind of like unexpected episode. You may know Phil. Phil is running a charity called Protect Earth, which is planting trees. And, you know, he's a very interesting guy. He's boycotting fossil fuels. He lives in a van. He's a pretty well-known software developer. He wrote a book about the APIs, and as far as I can tell, this is how he makes a living. But at the same time, he runs this charity. He buys land, and basically he reforests that land, or he helps farmers who tries to reforest or just plant some trees. And we get into the details of, you know, what they do. That this is really more complicated than you think. There's a lot of paperwork, and especially interesting is that not everywhere you should plant trees, and not everywhere you should reforest. And some people, you know, are quick to give the bad name of the charities that are planting trees, like, oh, you want to plant trees everywhere. Not everywhere. Phil is very much aware of where it is beneficial for the environment to plant trees and where not. His charity also does a lot of work on preserving existing woodlands. And how this episode came to be, there was basically a piece of land, like an old growth forest for sale. And that was, you know, a worry that might be purchased by a developer and turned into a estate, you know, cut down trees and so on. So Phil's charity was running a fundraiser to basically raise money and purchase that woodland. And he sent me an email or message on social media saying, like, hey, you know, maybe you could retweet that or whatever. And then I said, hey, why don't we do the podcast about it? And yeah, that's how it came to be. Very enjoyable conversation. Really cool dude, Phil Sturgeon. If you don't know him from social media, yeah, go give him a follow. You know, you might disagree with him and you may have a very fun arguments, like I do. You know, but conversation is great guy. Another one, 157, end of August, is the red wolf a real species? Conversation with Peter Brewitt. You know, red wolf is such a fun species of canids, and I heard about them some time ago when I read the book about coyotes, and I was attending, I think it was like a webinar where he was giving a presentation, not really about red wolves, but red wolf was like an example where he talked about the narratives, like people have their narratives, whether these are conspiracy theories or some other things, and how that influences the, really story that we're telling ourselves that are related to conservation. So you didn't have to ask me twice. I through various contacts, reached out to Peter, and we sat down and we spoke about Red Wolf and then about those conservation narratives. Really very fun conversation. Highly recommended the episode. And actually it did way better than I thought. My things were like, well, gee, who will care about Red Wolf? But then part of what I do, I also do a lot of episodes because they just interest me. I am interested in them. So that was one of them. And it turns out that you were interested as well. So good stuff. Next one in September now, 158, Wildlife in the Balance with Simon Musto. That is a review of a book called Wildlife in the Balance with Simon Musto. It is probably the most innovative book about wildlife and conservation that I read. I as usual in those things, I'm not entirely in agreement with everything that Simon said, but more and more, I think that he might be right. It's basically, he in the book connects wildlife and environments with physics, hardcore physics, entropy, and basically traces back all those interactions between the wildlife and the environment and the animals, specifically to basically, basic physics and distribution of energy and so on. So I am not sure about some of the conclusions that he draws from that, but definitely a book that's well worth reading, and that episode is well worth listening to because I challenged Simon on some of those aspects that I disagree with him. And, you need to listen to an episode to see what came out of this. Then 159, Polar Bears in a Warming World with Andrew DeRoche. That was really a delightful episode. I wrote a blog about polar bears and whether, again, I had a lot of messages from you about like, oh, polar bears are doing better than ever. There are more sightings and yada, 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 yada. So I kind of done my research, and I know like some of you say, oh, you haven't done research. You just Googled it. Like, okay, I Googled it and I wrote an article, but that was a research. Okay. I haven't done the literature review, but I researched the subject of in my own, personal capacity of polar bears and whether they're doing better than ever or whether they are indeed threatened with extinction. Wrote a blog, and in one of the responses to that blog, someone pointed me out to Andrew, who researched polar bears for like over 40 years. And I touched base with Andrew, and he was quick to, jump on the call and do the episode with me. So that was one of those episodes I didn't really plan, but it turned out to be, possible, and great pleasure talking with Andrew. Also very popular episode, and you can learn a lot about polar bears, and you can learn all the truth about polar bears, whether they're doing better than ever, or whether they're threatened by extinction, or is it somewhere in the middle, okay? You gotta listen to this episode, and then you can talk about this subject, okay? Please don't do those things that you watch the Instagram reel and then you repeat those things. This is not the way to do it. Listen to that episode. You'll know about polar bears, okay? 159. Now, 160, Safari Club International with Ben Cassidy. Safari Club International, one of the biggest hunting organizations. It's an American one, and it's very much, North American-centric episode. Ben Cassidy, his title is Director or Vice President of Policy. And again, kind of like the same theme like with David Scallan from FACE, which is kind of like a European hunting organization, where we talked about perception of hunting and all the pressures on hunting, only from the American perspective. And you may think that, in America, hunting is doing much better than in Europe, or at least there's like less opponents or less resistance to hunting. But they have their own challenges as well. So that was a very interesting episode to hear about really same challenges they have to overcome in America with relation to hunting like in any other country, right? North America, USA specifically. Okay, so that was episode 160, Safari Club International with Ben Cassidy. And then the next one, well, we stayed in the kind of realm of North America, 161, Archery Insights with Jim Clark. I will continue to talk about bow hunting because I think that bow hunting is very much misunderstood in Europe as somehow inhumane or whatever way of hunting. So that is in total in my podcast, probably third episode where I talk about hunting, archery hunting or bow hunting specifically. And Jim is basically a lifelong bow hunter, and we touch on everything about using crossbows, about hunting seasons, about training, about humanness of the sport and the whole deal. So if you think that archery hunting is inhumane, I would encourage you to listen to that episode. And if you don't think such things, but you're just interested in archery hunting, then again, 161. Then 162, Sheep, Soil, and Biodiversity with Susanna Crampton. That was one of the highlights of the year. I get to, I was invited to Susanna's farm, and we basically hang out for an entire day, have a great time. Susanna walked me around her farm. We were moving sheep. Well, not we were moving sheep. She was moving sheep, and I was just looking at it. But it was all fun. And then the episode, one of the biggest episodes that year, and very interesting because we talked about soil health, and how sheep farming or livestock farming doesn't have to be bad for biodiversity, or even how it can be very good for biodiversity, and how farming livestock in a good biodiverse conditions is really improving the viability of that farming operations and health of livestock. So I'm sure there's at least few environmentalists who are not happy about this episode because Susanna kind of crashed some of the common narratives, but I am convinced that she has a lot of research and science behind what she's saying, and not only that, she has the results on her farm, which you can hear by listening to the episode. It was published on the 7th of November, episode 162. The next one, 163. This is a very, episode that might be a type of episode I'm going to be doing more in the future. So in this episode, I have not one, but 5 guests. And it is more of a kind of a journalism on my part. As you might heard, the European Union and European Commission is pondering, or is right now proposed, lowering protection status of wolves in Europe, moving them from Annex 4 to Annex 5, which will make them protected rather than strictly protected. And obviously, wolves being wolves and the topic being so emotive, I thought that there's no way that one guest can present all points of view. So in that episode, you have not one, but 5 guests, goat breeders, scientists, social scientists, hunters, environmentalists. They're all giving their perspective on that move and what it might mean for wolves and wolves population in Europe if they will be only protected rather than strictly protected. I think that the episode is a good candidate to being, a best in that year. It was only published in November, so the numbers are still climbing. but I think that the discussion about wolves and protection of wolves in Europe will be with us for, number of months to come. So I encourage you to listen to this one, 162, the EU review of wolf protection status. Yeah, that will give you the full view of what that is. I can only tell you it is not all bad and it is not all good. There are worries and concerns, but it's not like an impending doom for wolves either. So listen to that one. Definitely, I would say so far, the most impact episode that had the biggest impact on conversation in my circles. And then we finished the year with 2 episodes that are book reviews. Book reviews, again, authors from North America. One of them, Shotgun Conservationist with Brant McDuff. Really kind of like a story again of a Brant went from anti-hunter to hunter and wrote a book about hunting, about the benefits of hunting. Very interesting from the, again, United States perspective, but again, like a theme, like a universal theme that comes from our conversation and from his book, but more so from our conversation, is that there's no such things as non-consumptive outdoor recreation. Like if you see a YouTube video of, someone riding mountain bike or skiing, you see all the cool stuff, but you don't see negative impacts on the environment. But when you see a hunter with a dead deer, well, you see straight away something that you might perceive as a negative impact on the environment, but you don't see all the positive aspects of hunting and the whole system that is around hunting, which is especially worth consideration when we talk about the United States. And we finished the year in the 19th of December, so just a few weeks ago, with episode 165, Flicker in the Water, with Bob Gonzalez. Bob Gonzalez is a very experienced master angler. He's chasing big fish, big game fishing. We're talking about big game fishing, marlin, tuna, other big species of fish like groupers, snappers, and etc. Fun conversation. It was late in the year, so I decided just to do something more kind of relaxing and maybe not that heavy topic to end 2023. So that's it. That's been a review of all the episodes from 2023. I hope you picked up a few that you can go now and listen to. And yeah, I am wishing you all the best for this new year, 2024. And I will talk to you and see you, or at least you're going to see me if you're watching this on YouTube, very soon. Have a good one.